Welcome to Graphic Tales.
Okay, let's maybe pause to talk about the awesome 80s fashion and that classic synth pop soundtrack for a second. Because honestly, underneath all the neon, the bikes, the Eggo waffles and Stranger Things, there's this core of real, cold, psychological terror. Sometimes it's almost unbearable, this show. It's not just a fun nostalgia trip. It's really a chronicle of relentless, escalating trauma.
It absolutely is. And if you actually look at the series through that horror lens, you see this incredibly deliberate, terrifying narrative buildup. I mean, it started out, as this small-town mystery really anchored in Cold War paranoia.
Yeah.
And it's just metastasized, hasn't it? Into this universe-threatening, dimension-merging, epic science fiction mystery, horror, and just deep, often really physical drama.
Yeah. So our deep dive today, it's built on a whole stack of sources. We're looking at a chronological and thematic breakdown of the series. From its creative beginnings, which are actually darker than a lot of people realize, right up to, well, the devastating final battle that's clearly looming in season 5. And our mission here, really, is to figure out precisely how the Duffer Brothers managed to weld together that familiar, 80s pop culture feel with genuine, constantly escalating psychological and physical horror. They set a baseline early on, didn't they? That idea that normal is fragile and often an illusion.
Totally. And the story is just violently proving that point again and again and again. So yeah, we're not here today to talk about shipping characters or who wore what best. We're diving into human experimentation, the really dark shadow of the Cold War, and that brutal collision of childhood innocence with something.
Well, cosmic and horrifying. Let's just put this out there for you right now. Even before the Demogorgons showed up, you could argue the fundamental villain of Stranger Things was always rooted in what the government created, those hidden horrors.
Okay, so if we peel back those layers right to the beginning, the creative origins, what the Duffer Brothers were actually pitching wasn't some, gentle, nostalgic romp. They were trying to sell an 8-hour sci-fi horror epic. That was the pitch. Uncompromising for the series that was originally called Montauk, right? Montauk.
Yeah.
And the vision they sold is super specific, wasn't it? Pitched as a love letter to the golden age of Steven Spielberg and Stephen King.
Yeah, that blend.
That fusion had to somehow combine human drama and supernatural fear. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think, and points to just how deep that narrative engine goes. The key inspiration wasn't like another monster movie. It came from that 2013 film, Prisoners.
That's the real insight, yeah. They weren't just thinking about, cool monsters. They were thinking about parental agony. Prisoners is all about that intense, morally gray struggle of a father after his daughter's kidnapped. The Duffers were apparently wondering, how could we stretch that specific feeling, that psychological distress, that desperation over 8 hours of TV?
Wow.
And that's the real engine driving Joyce Byers in season 1, her seemingly absolutely bonkers behavior. It's not just cinematic madness, it's tapping into a parent pushed way beyond the breaking point.
That immediately grounds the whole supernatural threat in something incredibly real, incredibly painful human experience. And that initial setting choice, Montauk, New York, that also says a lot about their commitment to grounding it all in paranoia.
Oh, definitely. It was picked specifically because of those real-world conspiracy theories. Montauk is like the legendary site of secret government experiments in some circles. It fit perfectly with the brothers' interest in Cold War black projects. It just gave them this ready-made mythology of secrecy, containment failure, hidden science.
Which leads us straight to Project MKUltra. And this feels like the key pivot, doesn't it? Away from just fantasy and into dark, cold science fiction. The writers deliberately tied the monster's existence to science, right? To a catastrophic failure of human experimentation, not some spiritual evil or pure magic.
Exactly. And our sources really detail this timeline. Project MKUltra, that was a real declassified CIA program, ran from 1953, all about mind control, psychological manipulation, drug testing on unwilling human subjects. The Duffers specifically wove references to this in, showing Dr. Brenner starting his experiments in Hawkins around 1969. So the horror here, it's man-made.
Yeah.
The Demogorgon isn't some natural beast from another dimension. Initially, it's more like an accidental, horrifying consequence of illegal government research gone terribly wrong.
It grounds the totally ungroundable, yeah. And they set the main story in 1983, a year they chose, very strategically. It was just before the movie Red Dawn came out. That timing was absolutely designed to tap into an already existing, high level of Cold War paranoia in America.
You already kind of believe the government was hide or shady stuff. The show just gave you a monster to prove you right, basically.
And their influences, the cinematic DNA they talked about, it was pure dread, way beyond just Amblin nostalgia. The creators cited really specific touchstones. David Lynch, deep surrealism, unsettling mystery. John Carpenter, master of that contained atmospheric dread. Wes Craven, architect of those self-aware slashers. And crucially, the cosmic horror vibe of H.P. Lovecraft, which points to entities so vast, so unknowable, they literally drive people mad.
And heavy on Stephen King novels, too, of course. Firestarter, government experiments, creating a kid with powers, needful things, small town, moral rot. It just established from the get-go that this show was always meant to be scary on both a human and a cosmic scale.
But their initial intent, creatively, was actually pretty restrained, wasn't it? Focusing on mood and atmosphere and suspense and dread, kind of like those PG-13 Amblin films from the 80s.
Yeah, that focus on mood over, explicit gore is why Season 1 feels so suffocating sometimes. It's the lingering shots, the sound design, what you don't see.
But the horror couldn't stay restrained, could it? It had to evolve. As the show went on, as the kids got older, the violence ramped up, the scope widened, and the ultimate villain, Vecna Henry Creel, when he really represents the peak of that evolution into darkness.
Oh, completely. Vecna is the ultimate convergence of all those horror influences they loved. He was explicitly inspired by the absolute classic horror icons that genuinely terrified the Duffers as kids. We're talking Freddy Krueger attacking you in your dreams, weaponizing your guilt.
Right.
Pinhead, the face of extreme psychological, even physical pain. And Pennywise, the shapeshifter, preying on childhood fear. Vecna isn't just some monster. He's intelligent. He's a trauma-weaponizing serial killer, with a human origin story rooted in those very experiments.
Certainly.
The horror has gone completely internal by Season 4.
Okay, so if the genesis was government failure, M-culture basically blowing the door off reality, then Season 1 was the immediate, painful shockwave hitting Hawkins.
Yeah.
Kick off the series. November 1983, Will Byers just vanishes after a Dungeons & Dragons game. Simple as that.
And that D&D games are just so important, isn't it? It sets up the innocence that's about to be completely shattered. You see the everyday joys of childhood just slam right into this unimaginable darkness. And the timeline in that first week, it's designed for maximum emotional urgency, pure dread.
Yeah, let's break that down because it moves incredibly fast. It gives everyone whiplash. Will disappears November 6th. Just 2 days later, Barb is abducted, November 8th. And her death is largely ignored, certainly by the adults.
And that narrative confusion is totally deliberate. By November 10th, the town thinks Will's body has been found in the quarry. Collective grief kicks in. Then Hopper, already suspicious, figures out the body is just a sophisticated dummy, which validates Joyce's increasingly frantic behavior with the Christmas lights, right? That whole relentless short timeline, less than a week, nobody gets a moment to breathe. They're just thrown immediately into this existential crisis.
And the actual catalyst, the trigger for all this suffering, it's 11. Our sources confirm she unintentionally rips open that gate to the Upside Down while she's in the sensory deprivation tank. She makes contact with the Demogorgon while trying to spy on the Russians for Brenner.
That moment in the tank, that's basically the original sin of the entire series, isn't it? She's the bomb that starts the war for Hawkins. Even though she's just a child, a test subject being manipulated by Dr. Brenner, her actions set everything else in motion, and she carries that immense weight.
But surviving doesn't mean you're safe. That leads us into Season 2. Set almost a year later, October 1984. And the theme there feels incredibly harsh. Being saved doesn't mean okay.
That's the cruel, realistic truth of surviving something like that, yeah? Will gets rescued from the physical grasp of the Upside Down, but his suffering just continues immediately. He's plagued by those premonitions, the now sights, seeing Hawkins' eventual fall, and then he gets mentally possessed by the Mind Flayer. This is a massive escalation of the threat.
It totally shifts the horror inward. The Demogorgon was physical teeth, claws, you run from it. The Mind Flayer, that's cosmic. It's this monstrous intelligence that corrupts and invades your identity. It's a hive mind, and its goal is possession, complete control. Systemic.
And you see the ultimate expression of that mind control when the Mind Flayer uses Will's body not just as a host, but as an unwilling spy. It forces him to tap out that crucial message, close gate, basically making him sabotage the efforts to protect himself and everyone else. The horror there is intensely psychological.
God, yeah. Fighting for control of your own body, your own mind. Knowing your actions are being used to destroy everything you love.
It's not about running from teeth anymore. It's about exorcism, reclaiming your identity, which they finally manage, driving the Mind Flayer out with intense heat.
Before we jump to Season 3, though, we have to talk about justice for Barb, right? Because this is one of those rare times where audience reaction directly shaped the story. And it adds this really crucial layer about, well, Social injustice.
Absolutely. The character, Barb Holland, according to the Duffers, she wasn't initially written to be a big deal. She was kind of a quick victim, meant to establish the Demogorgons' threat early on. But she just resonated so fiercely with the audience. People saw her as this relatable misfit whose death was just utterly ignored by the system, by the preoccupied adults in Hawkins.
Yeah.
So the writers, they saw this huge organic fan movement online, and they basically used it as narrative fuel for season 2. Nancy's whole arc that season is about confronting the cold reality that no one ever cares about Barb. She teams up with Jonathan and Murray, the conspiracy theorists,
Ballman, yeah,
to demand answers, to force a reckoning for the government's cover-up. They ultimately force the system to acknowledge Barb's existence, give her a proper funeral.
It's the show acknowledging that even in a town dealing with monsters, the human system still failed this young girl and her family. They delivered that necessary layer of real-world justice, the human cost, right alongside all the supernatural chaos. And that's what makes the trauma feel so grounded, so real.
By season 3, the stakes don't just, increase. They explode. The conflict goes wider geographically, politically. It moves way beyond just a small-town mystery. The show kind of sheds that Amblin skin and fully embraces being a geopolitical thriller.
Right. The timeline shifts to the summer of 1985. And the threat isn't just coming from the failed containment at Hawkins lab anymore. It's an outright international incident. Our sources note there's a secret Soviet laboratory operating underneath the shiny new Starcourt Mall, actively trying to force the gateway to the upside-down back open.
The Cold War paranoia that was always kind of simmering just becomes literal. You get figures like Grigori, that Terminator-style Russian soldier, showing up. It turns the show into this espionage thriller, but still wrapped in horror. And that shift tells you, okay, this problem, it's not local anymore. The wit is actively trying to weaponize this gateway.
And the Mind Flayer comes back, naturally. But the possession again feels intensely personal. It targets Billy Hargrove this time. And he already had this deeply violent, unpredictable, and abusive nature, didn't he? The Mind Flayer doesn't just take him over, it seems to amplify the darkness that was already there. Billy becomes the physical, murderous extension of the Flayer's will on Earth.
Yeah, it uses human cruelty as its foundation, the possession and transformation of Billy, and then the other townspeople into those grotesque, flayed, that pushes the show right into body horror territory. The Mind Flayer is literally building a physical army using the citizens of Hawkins, melting them down. It's grim.
Which leads to his big, dramatic, very bloody sacrifice at the mall. 11 manages to break through the possession, not with force, but by appealing to his buried humanity, right? His memories of his mom, and allows him to stand up to the Mind Flayer just before he's killed. And it illustrates that ultimate tragic cost of this battle. Redemption, but paid for in blood. It confirms even the most damaged character can have that moment of choice before death.
And the end of season 3, that's where the physical destruction of the town really kicks off. Hopper is lost, seemingly dies in the gate explosion. And maybe even more significantly for the town itself, Hawkins is left structurally devastated. The secret is becoming physically impossible to hide anymore.
The jump to season 4, set in March 1986. That feels like the show just fully committing to full-blown psychological horror and drama. Our sources label this the darkest season, really emphasizing loss, sacrifice, chronic suffering.
Yeah, this is where we meet Vecna, the villain who truly embodies that idea of internal weaponized horror. And we learn his backstory. He's Henry Creel, a murderous psychic being, formerly human test subject 1, disfigured by lightning when 11 banished him to the Upside Down years ago. His origin ties directly back to M-Cultura. It brings the whole story full circle to human failure, creating the ultimate monster.
And Vecna's method of attack is just chillingly intimate. It draws so heavily on that Freddy Krueger inspiration. He explicitly taps into internal wounds. He uses fear, regret, trauma to kill his victims.
Like Chrissy, right? Popular cheerleader, but secretly riddled with trauma, body image issues, her mother's cruelty. Vecna targets that specific wound, drives her to hallucinations before brutally killing her. And that murder, right at the start of the season, is the first time Vecna opens a new gate between worlds. Every single psychic murder creates another literal rift. The dimensional collapse is escalating exponentially.
The personal cost is immediate and brutal again. Max Mayfield becomes his main target. Vecna taps right into her crushing guilt over Billy's death. And although she fights him so bravely in that mental space, the whole Kate Bush scene,
incredible scene,
she's ultimately attacked, ends up paralyzed, comatose. The show makes it agonizingly clear. Heroism comes at the cost of permanent, life-altering damage. There are consequences.
And at the same time, the scale is now truly global. Well, the main crew in Hawkins fights Vecna. The action is split across continents. Eleving's in California, struggling with losing her powers, getting bullied, dealing with her past trauma. And Joyce and Murray fly literally halfway across the world to a Russian gulag in Kamchatka to rescue Hopper, who wasn't dead after all. The Upside Down isn't just a Hawkins problem anymore. Its influence, its consequences are international.
And the climax of season 4 just leaves Hawkins in total chaos, physically fractured, those 4 huge rifts merging, the world is badly damaged. And not only is the supernatural threat worse than ever, but now the U.S. military is openly hunting Eleven, believing she's the cause of the disaster.
So heading into season 5, which is set in the fall of 1987, apparently, the stakes are completely existential. The final chapter has to be about finding and killing Vecna, the ultimate symbol of their past failures, and addressing that immense long-term cost of power, moving on from childhood and facing your fears fully. This isn't just another rescue mission. It feels like the final defense of reality itself.
You know, one of the things that makes the horror in Stranger Things feel so potent, especially when you consider the source material's emphasis on government failure, is how its dark themes keep brushing up against real-world shadows, both historically and legally.
Yeah, let's start with that legal controversy because it ties right back to that whole foundational idea of government conspiracy in the original Montauk title. In 2018, a filmmaker named Charlie Kessler filed a lawsuit. He claimed the Duffer Brothers stole the concept from his 2012 short film, which was also called Montauk.
Right. In Kessler's short film, it had a strikingly similar core idea. Missing boy, military experiments, interdimensional monster. He claimed he'd pitched a bigger film idea, the Montauk Project, to the brothers at a film festival. It definitely sounded pretty damning initially, given the shared titles and themes.
It was high profile for a bit, yeah. But the Duffer Brothers strongly denied ever seeing his film. And the sources confirmed the lawsuit was actually withdrawn just before trial. Apparently, legal documents came out showing the Duffers had independently developed their core concept child with powers, government labs, mystery way back in 2010.
Okay. But the controversy itself really highlights where these dark ideas come from, doesn't it?
No.
Both parties were clearly drawing from that widely circulated urban legend of the Montauk Project, popularized by that 1992 book, The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time. It kind of suggests these deep fears about secret government experiments, timeline manipulation. They were just floating out there waiting for someone to adapt them.
Exactly. The show is tapping into a cultural fear that existed long before it premiered. The Montauk Project myth, just like the real history of Encultra, it gives the audience permission to suspend disbelief. Because the basic premise, government overreach, hidden experiments, it feels plausible. It's already baked into our history and paranoia.
And then there's the controversy around the filming locations, which brings the show's dark fictional history into this really chilling collision with actual historical atrocities. This is a serious ethical shadow the show had to deal with.
Yeah, this is a particularly grim instance of real-world impact. For season 4, they filmed at Lukishev's prison in Vilnius, Lithuania. That was the setting for Hopper's imprisonment in the Russian gulag. But Jewish and Roma community groups immediately condemned using that location.
And for very good reason. The site has this horrifying history tied directly to the Holocaust. It was used by the Nazis, later the Soviets. Its connection to the mass killings at the Ponary Massacre. It meant the site was inherently linked to genocide, to deep, real historical trauma.
And the controversy didn't stop just at filming there. Netflix and the local tourism board, Go Vilnius, they actually went a step further and tried to capitalize on it. They collaborated to rent out a refurbished Stranger Things-themed prison cell on Airbnb, like as a tourist attraction.
Wow. That's where the ethical line feels well and truly crossed. The critics were incredibly vocal, arguing that monetizing a site of such profound suffering actively, quote, desecrates the living memories of Holocaust survivors. The backlash was huge, immediate, massive petition, over 60,000 signatures, and they had to indefinitely close the rental. It's just a stark reminder, isn't it? Even a global blockbuster franchise can't just ignore the gravity of historical truth and basic ethical responsibility.
And moving beyond that, the franchise's own vast, expanded universe only seems to reinforce this theme of persistent, inescapable trauma. All the tie-in media seems to exist purely to fill in the grim backstories the main show only hints at.
Absolutely. Those prequel novels and comics, they dive deep into the mythology of pain. You've got Suspicious Minds, which focuses specifically on Eleven's mother, Terry Ives. Her horrific experiences with Brenner's culture experiments back in 1969. This is just like a fun side story. It details systematic psychological and physical abuse inflicted by Brenner on his test subjects.
And it continues with the kids themselves, too. There's Runaway Max, detailing Max's pre-Hawkins trauma, her difficult family history, showing that the vulnerability Vecna later exploits was already part of her identity. And the prequel comic 6 introduces Francine, another psychic test subject of Brenner's. It just confirms 11 wasn't unique. She was one in a long line of experimental victims. The horror is systemic. It spans years.
And if you need any more proof that the core mythology has become rooted purely in horror and survival, look at the gaming tie-ins. The Demogorgon, Nancy, and Steve were famously added to Dead by Daylight. That's an asymmetric multiplayer horror game.
Right. And that decision strips away all the nostalgia, doesn't it? It places those characters directly into a brutal, pure survival horror context where they're just being hunted mercilessly. It really confirms that at its heart, the franchise's lasting identity is one of fear, struggle, and survival against overwhelming odds.
And it looks like the future is embracing that darkness, too. Finn Wolfhard, who plays Mike, described the planned live-action spin-off. He said it could potentially be like David Lynch's Twin Peaks.
Which is a deeply meaningful comparison, right? Twin Peaks is all about small-town darkness, unsettling mystery, surreal violence. Wolfhard suggested the spinoff might be an anthology, different tones, but still tied together by the upside-down mythology.
Yeah, he specifically mentioned it might not even talk about Hawkins or the main characters. Instead, suggesting, well, if there was a lab in Hawkins and one in Russia, maybe there are labs everywhere. A sprawling, disturbing universe where government experimentation is the dark, universal norm. The horror isn't an anomaly. It's a global, systematic problem, constantly creating new victims, new rifts. Hashtag outro. So we kick this off saying this is way more than just nostalgia, and I think our deep dive really proves that point. Stranger Things is this precise, painful chronicle of continuous escalating trauma. It goes from one boy simply vanishing in 1983, shattering one family, to a full-blown, dimension-merging apocalypse engulfing an entire town just 3 years later.
It really is a narrative about the real compounding cost of heroism, isn't it? The kids, the adults, and Hawkins, they carry this almost unimaginable burden. Psychological damage, mind control, possession, physical devastation, permanent loss. The show implicitly asks us, how much trauma can one group actually endure before they just break?
And the very foundation of the show was secrecy. Government secrecy, the culture experiments, the Montauk urban legend, secrets meticulously covered up, supposed to stay buried forever, held by guys like Dr. Brenner.
But now, the gate's been breached again and again. Hawkins lies physically and psychologically devastated. The terrifying final thought we want to leave you with is this. The real mystery going into this final season probably isn't what the Upside Down is anymore. It's whether any government Brenner scientists, the U.S. military rolling in at the end of season 3 can actually put this unimaginable horror back in the box.
The secret is violently out. The lines between dimensions are literally dissolving. And that normal world, which the show told us from the start, was always fragile. It seems destined to finally shatter under the weight of this catastrophic failure of containment. What happens when the whole world knows the true nature of the Upside Down? That's the real horror we're waiting to see confronted in the final season.